She just wanted to finish her night shift and go home. A poor 19-year-old girl exhausted, invisible to the world. Or, at least, that's what Elowen thought. Until that night, when she stepped into the glass-walled office at the top of the building, politely asked if she could clean, and heard a shudder that was thick with silence and shock. The man in front of her was Rowan Devereux, the millionaire CEO she only knew from afar. But the moment he saw her, he froze. Not by accident, not out of distraction. He froze because he recognized something in her face, something time had tried to erase. What began as just another janitorial shift turned into the unraveling of a 20-year-old secret and a reunion that would change everything. "Excuse me, sir, may I clean in here?" Rowan Devereux looked up out of habit, expecting just another voice, just another night employee. But the sight that met his eyes stopped his world cold. The young woman standing in front of him had piercing green eyes far too familiar, like the ones that haunted his oldest dreams. Her face, though younger, carried features he knew in his bones, that delicate jawline, the curve of her nose, that same quiet in her gaze. She wore the navy blue uniform of the company's cleaning crew, and she had no idea she was stirring chaos inside that glass tower above Chicago. Outside, the city shimmered beneath a cloudy spring sky. Lights danced across the skyscrapers, reflections casting glittering illusions on the windows. But inside that room, everything had gone still. Rowan, the powerful CEO who commanded empires, suddenly found himself a prisoner of a memory he thought long buried. The girl, oblivious to his inner storm, calmly set a bottle of disinfectant and a cloth on the side table, waiting for his go-ahead. It took him a few seconds to respond. "Yeah, of course. Go ahead." His voice came out hoarse, almost like a scraped whisper. She nodded a quiet thank you, not making eye contact, and walked over to the side of the room. As she began cleaning her movements gentle and precise, Rowan watched her, increasingly unsettled. There was something he couldn't ignore, an urgent, almost cruel certainty. And when she turned slightly to reach the lamp, the light caught her green eyes in just the right way. That's when he knew. She looked too much like Celeste Vaughn, the name he hadn't dared to say in nearly 20 years. The woman he'd loved before he became the cold, calculated man people feared today. The woman his parents had broken with threats and lies. The woman who disappeared and never came back. And now, standing right there, was a mirror of her younger self with the same last name stitched onto her name badge. Elowen Vaughn. He read the name later, when he requested her employee file. His stomach dropped, his head spun, the math hit. Hard 19 years. Exactly the time since Celeste vanished without a trace. Rowan clutched the badge like it was final proof that the past never really dies, it just hides in the shadows. And now, it was pounding on his door. This quiet, poor girl who had walked in just to clean his office had, without knowing, touched a raw nerve in his soul. There was something sacred about it, something he couldn't shake. And even though the world outside kept moving like nothing had changed, for Rowan, nothing was the same anymore, because in that one look, without even realizing it, he had just found his daughter. Elowen didn't see the look on Rowan's face. To her, it was just another office, another shift. That night, like every other, her body ached, her muscles were sore, and her mind felt heavy. Ever since her mom passed away a year ago, life had become an endless string of tasks with no breaks. Work, study, survive. There was no one waiting for her at home, no time to rest, no room left to dream. She'd wake up early, head to her technical courses hungry, race to work, and come back alone under the city's cold streetlights. There was a kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. It was soul deep. Elowen fought every day to keep her head up, even when everything around her seemed to weigh her down. She worked multiple jobs throughout the week, but that building RD Corp was the quietest. And that helped. She liked cleaning at night, when no one was around to watch, or so she thought. The double shifts were wearing her down. She barely slept, ate whatever she could find, and her academic dreams felt further away with each passing day. More often than not, she'd fall asleep with textbooks on her chest, waking up in a panic, afraid she'd overslept. She lived on the edge, surviving on the bare minimum, pushing today's pain to tomorrow. She'd stopped being a teenager far too soon. Her mom's death had forced her into adulthood before she was ready. But it wasn't just the physical exhaustion, it was the emotional weight too. Her mother's absence felt like a permanent hole in her chest. Elowen still heard her voice in memories, still saw her face in faded photos around the tiny apartment. Sometimes, when she cleaned offices filled with books and plants like Rowan, she remembered how Celeste used to say, "Beauty lives in the details." Elowen would smile to herself. But the smile never quite reached her eyes. The hardest part, though, was the question that never got answered: who was her father? Celeste had never said. When asked, she'd brush it off, saying it didn't matter. "You only need me," she'd say softly, though her tone always carried a trace of sadness. After her death, Elowen searched through papers, letters, old photos, only to find a single name, scribbled alone: Rowan. But she didn't know if it was real or just the dream of a girl who once fell in love. She never had the courage to look further, and now, without knowing it, she had come face to face with the man she'd spent her life wondering about. Without knowing it, the father she thought she'd never meet was standing just a few feet away, trying to figure out how to fix 2 decades of absence. On the other side of the room, Rowan felt torn apart. His thoughts no longer returned to spreadsheets or meetings. They kept circling back to her face, her name, the choices he made or failed to make. There was no handbook for this moment. How do you tell a young woman she's your daughter when she's lived her whole life without you? How do you repair a silence that long? And Elowen, exhausted, just kept going. She cleaned the offices with care, closed her eyes on the subway home, trying to picture a different life. One where the world was a little kinder, one where she didn't have to fight so hard. What she didn't know not yet was that everything was about to change. Elowen had a quiet kind of beauty, not the kind that turned heads on the street, but the kind that slowly revealed itself over time. In silence, in the way she spoke gently, in the guarded light behind her green eyes. She was thin, with narrow shoulders and hands that were always busy. Her brown hair reached down to her waist, usually tied up in a messy bun for work. Her green eyes were the most visible thing her mother had left her, and also the loneliest. Because ever since Celeste died, Elowen hadn't truly belonged anywhere. She had only been 18 when she lost her mother suddenly. Celeste had a severe asthma attack during the winter and didn't make it through the wait at the public clinic. There was no health insurance, no support system. It was just the two of them. And then, overnight, we became me. The day after the funeral, Elowen realized there was no one to tell her what to do, where to go, or who to lean on. Grief didn't even have time to settle. It got swallowed by survival. Since then, she worked however she could. She started with weekend cleaning gigs, then full-time. She bounced between commercial offices and small apartments downtown. She never complained, even when she was falling apart. She never cried in public. But sometimes, sitting on the kitchen floor with a piece of stale bread and the kettle heating up, she let the tears fall, quietly, without sound. Because even crying felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Despite everything, Elowen never stopped being kind. She helped her elderly neighbors, lent them detergent, watched someone's kid when they needed to run an errand. She was the kind of person everyone liked, but no one really knew. She carried whole worlds inside her, guarded by silence. And somehow, that silence made her deeper than words could ever describe. What hurt the most wasn't being poor, it was being rootless. She had never known her father. Her mother refused to talk about it. The closest she ever got was the one time she heard Celeste whisper Rowan in her sleep. Years later, after Celeste was gone, she found the name scribbled in the margin of an old journal page. No last name, No clue. Just a name that pulsed, like an old bruise. With no answers, Elowen started making up her own. Sometimes, she imagined her father as a good man, someone who had been kept away from her. Other times, he was just a selfish guy who left. But most days, she tried not to think about it at all. The emptiness hurt too much, and she already had more pain than she could carry. Still, she kept her technical school notebooks neat and tidy. She studied during her breaks, read at night, wrote her dreams on sticky notes and put them on the wall. She dreamed of a different life, a home where she wasn't just a guest of her own hope, a life where someone saw her fully and stayed. What she didn't realize was that someone was already watching her, and that the look in his eyes wasn't pity, it was recognition. Because Elowen was exactly that, a reunion waiting to happen. Elowen's life was made of small, daily battles, quiet ones, nearly invisible to anyone on the outside, but enormous to the one living them from within. Sometimes, it was the packed bus that left her standing for nearly an hour after her night shift. Other times, it was the damp uniform that hadn't dried in time, forcing her to wear it still wet. And most days, it was the built-up exhaustion that made her whole body ache when the alarm went off at 5 a.m. But she got up, always, not by choice, by necessity. The biggest obstacle of all was time, or rather, the lack of it. There was no space for leisure, no time to care for herself, and certainly no room for sadness. Her shifts overlapped with classes, side jobs with exams, grocery runs with late-night studying. Her schedule was a tightrope where one misstep could trigger an avalanche. And the worst part, she had no room to fail. She couldn't get sick, couldn't be late, couldn't make mistakes. Even with all her effort, sometimes the money just didn't stretch far enough. She'd run out of gas, run out of rice, used laundry soap to wash dishes. One especially tight month, she survived 2 days on nothing but crackers and tea. No one knew, because Elowen never asked, never showed her pain. The pride she inherited from her mother was the same pride that kept her from reaching out even when she desperately needed to. Loneliness was another burden. It hurt, but it made no noise. It echoed in the silence when she sat on her bed after a long day of work, phone still and silent, no notifications, no messages, no voices, no hugs, no one to share anything with. She tried to fill the silence with music, books, shows she watched in bits and pieces on her phone, but nothing replaced the real presence of another person. Still, she pretended she was okay. She'd learned to smile with tired eyes and hide behind phrases like, "I'm fine," or "just a little tired." On the hardest days, she wrote to herself little notes like "You're doing great" or "Don't give up." She'd stick them to the kitchen wall. It was her way of holding on. She also grew herbs in old ice cream containers, mint, rosemary, a little sunflower sprout that never bloomed. Just like me, she'd think, growing where I can, even without enough light, and yet, despite it all, Elowen didn't give up. That was the most remarkable thing. Even with no one there to cheer her on, she kept going. Even with no guarantees, she kept trying. Little victories meant the world to her. Paying rent on time, getting a good grade, winning back a client who was about to cancel. Each of those was a hard-earned win, and no one knew. What she didn't know yet was that all that quiet strength hadn't gone unnoticed. That something bigger than just another shift or setback was quietly forming behind the scenes. What seemed like just another hard day, would soon become the turning point in the story of the poor girl with the green eyes. It happened one early morning, after another exhausting shift, eyes heavy with sleep. Elowen stared at her reflection in the window. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just looked as if trying to understand who that girl was in the stained uniform, surrounded by plants in recycled containers. Life felt frozen in place, and that scared her more than pain ever had. So, she decided to try. Something simple, but bold, She filled out an application for a partial scholarship to a technical nursing school. She didn't really know why she picked nursing. Maybe because she remembered her mom getting sick alone. Maybe because she wanted to care for others the way no one had cared for her. She filled it out on a borrowed computer at the internet cafe. She typed fast, hands shaking. She had to finish before the timer ran out on the screen and in her life. When she finally clicked submit, her chest tightened. It felt like she was shouting into the void, "I exist. Please, give me a chance." In the days that followed, she checked her phone more than usual, even though she knew her odds were slim. There were girls younger than her, with better resumes and glowing recommendation letters. Elowen didn't have anyone to vouch for her. All she had was her story and the quiet grit buried in every line she typed. Still, she hoped, quietly, like someone whispering a wish to the universe and pretending they don't expect an answer. She also started leaving simple copies of her resume at the front desks of small office buildings, just a brown envelope, her name, and a paper-thin dream. It was symbolic. Each resume was a silent declaration. I can do more. I'm more than a mop and a rag. But no one called. Her phone stayed quiet. And the silence began to sting. One night, while cleaning the floor in the main hallway, she dropped the disinfectant bottle. The liquid spilled and spread. A passing executive didn't hold back. Be more careful, please. This is a corporate office, not a corner store. She lowered her head. Cleaned up in silence. And only when she was alone in the restroom did she let a single tear fall. That was the day she almost gave up. She stood outside her apartment, gripping the key in a trembling hand. Why keep trying if nothing ever changes, she thought. But when she stepped inside and saw the post-it on the wall written in her own handwriting, "Don't stop now," she took a deep breath, changed clothes, and started reviewing her notes from the last class. She cried softly as she read. But she didn't stop. Those small acts, even the imperfect ones, began shifting something inside her. Almost unnoticeably, like the breeze before a storm. The fear still walked beside her, but now there were sparks of hope hidden in the folds of her routine, because trying, for Elowen, was the purest form of faith. And though she didn't know it yet, someone had started watching those quiet, determined steps, someone who just days ago hadn't even known she existed. But now, he couldn't get her out of his mind. Rowan Devereux wasn't a man who got caught off guard easily. But ever since that night, since the moment she walked in with a cleaning cloth in her hand and a lifetime in her eyes, his mind hadn't found peace. He knew, deep down, the moment he saw her, he just knew. And when he confirmed the name on her employee file, Elowen Vaughn, there was no more doubt. Time stopped right then and there, because, without warning, he had come face to face with the daughter he never knew he had. Elowen, on the other hand, just carried on. She didn't notice the lingering glances from the CEO at the top of the glass stairwell. She didn't pick up on the quiet questions from the secretary asking about her life. She kept sweeping, scrubbing, tidying up as if nothing had changed. But something was starting to shift around her. The air felt heavier, people seemed gentler, and there was this strange feeling, like someone was watching her differently. Rowan began timing his steps to catch her during her shifts. Even if he never said a word, just her presence was enough to shake him to the core. Seeing Elowen walk the same hallways he'd ruled for years was unbearable. How had he not seen it before? How had life allowed his own daughter to grow up cleaning the floors of the company he built? It tore him apart. He had everything, money, power, but standing there in front of her, he felt like the poorest man alive. He spent sleepless nights going through old letters from Celeste, rereading notes she'd written. The thought that she might have tried to warn him and that maybe he hadn't listened, or didn't want to listen, drove him mad. He blamed himself for not searching, for not pushing harder. And yet, now, he was terrified it might be too late. How do you approach a daughter you've never met, a daughter who grew up not even knowing your name? He tried a quiet gesture. One day, seeing her at the reception desk, he offered her a cup of coffee. She politely declined, not understanding. "Thank you, sir, but I'm good." Her voice cut right through him. He gave a small, reserved smile. "You're always here, working so hard. This company's lucky to have someone like you." Elowen just nodded. She felt a little off. Why was he talking to her? CEOs didn't talk to janitors. She went back to work, heart slightly unsettled. For Rowan, it stung more than he expected, that rejection, unintentional as it was, felt like the punishment he probably deserved. But he didn't give up. He couldn't. He began paying closer attention to her routines. He knew where she kept her supplies, how she folded the cloth at the end of her shift, the little handwritten notes she left for the night crew with encouragements like, "You did your best today, even tired." That wrecked him. How could she be so strong, so kind, so human? Slowly, Rowan began to see parts of himself in her: the quiet stubbornness, the discipline, the way she took everything in with eyes that noticed more than they said. But he also saw Celeste in her, the grace, the calm, the dignity. Elowen was a living piece of both of them, a breathing echo of a past he thought was long gone. And now, she was here, alive, fighting, shining quietly, but between them stood a wall, time, absence, everything that had never been said. Rowan knew he couldn't just walk up to her and say, "I'm your father." She didn't trust him. Why would she? To her, he was just the distant boss, a symbol of everything she never had. He needed to find a way. And he knew one wrong step could push her away forever. So, he chose to wait, to watch, to approach carefully, and, more than anything, to understand who she was, not just as his daughter, but as a person. Because before he could reveal himself, he had to earn it. He had to rebuild himself from the inside out, to finally become not just the man who brought Elowen into the world, but the father she never had. It was a cold night, with a sharp wind and heavy clouds overhead, when Rowan saw her outside the company building for the first time. She was sitting on the steps by the side entrance, elbows resting on her knees, eyes lost in the city lights. He hesitated before approaching. He wore a gray overcoat and carried the hot coffees in his hands. The urge to walk away was strong, but something stronger pulled him forward, the urgency not to waste any more time. "Still here?" he asked, voice low, like someone asking permission to step into someone else's life. Elowen looked up slowly, startled, but polite. "Was waiting for the bus. The last one got cancelled. Will it be long?" She shrugged, without complaint. "Usually, comes in about half an hour." He offered her one of the cups. "Want a coffee?" "It's really hot." She hesitated for a second, then accepted. "Thanks." They sat there for a few minutes, side by side, like two strangers trying to disguise the strange familiarity in the silence. Rowan looked at her, his heart breaking. Every unspoken word seemed to collapse inside him. She didn't say much, but mentioned a tough day, the cold, her coursework. When she smiled shy, reserved, he had to turn away. It was Celeste's smile, exactly the same, unbearable. "Do you live alone?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She nodded. "Since my mom passed." It was like the world stopped. The confirmation he already knew, now spoken from her own lips. "I'm sorry." "Thanks," she replied, her voice steady. "She was everything to me." Rowan stayed quiet. The moment was begging for something more, but he still didn't have the courage. That conversation had cracked the door open, but it also flung the pain wide, and it hurt more than he could have imagined. Hearing his daughter speak of her mother's death like someone cradling the entire universe in her arms while he, the man beside her, was the source of a silence that had shaped her whole life. That night, he went home shattered, locked himself in his office and pulled out the letter Celeste had written him years ago, the one he never had the nerve to reread. And there it was, near the end, a single line that cut like a blade. "If she ever asks about her father, tell her the truth, even if it hurts. She deserves to know where she comes from." He didn't sleep. Spent the night writing. He tried to start a letter, but couldn't finish it. There were too many wrongs to explain, too many empty spaces he'd never be able to fill. By morning, he looked at himself in the mirror. He was no longer the polished CEO, he was just a man, trying to find a daughter somewhere in the ruins of his own mistakes, and then he made a decision. He couldn't wait any longer. That evening, he left an envelope at the company's front desk with her name on it. Inside, an old photo. Celeste and Rowan Young, smiling, holding hands, and, on the back, a single sentence, written with trembling hands. Your name is Elowen Devereux. I need to tell you the truth. The envelope was delivered discreetly, just as planned. Elowen received it from the doorman at the end of her shift. This was left for you, he said. She frowned. She never received anything especially, not white envelopes heavy with the weight of old paper. She opened it right there, between the elevator and the basement hallway, and when she saw the photo, she nearly dropped it. It was her mother, young, laughing, standing next to a man who was the CEO of the company. Rowan, on the back of the photo, only one sentence. Your name is Elowen Devereux. I need to tell you the truth. Her world collapsed. Literally, she sat on the floor, leaning against the cold wall. Her hands were sweating, her mouth dry, her head spinning. This had to be a mistake, a prank, a misunderstanding. But deep down, something inside her knew, and that's what hurt the most. She didn't sleep that night. She read the sentence 10, 20 times, stared at the photo until Rowan's young face was etched into her memory. She tried to remember if her mom had ever said something, anything, a hint, a look, a gesture, but there was nothing clear, just that name, Rowan, scribbled in an old journal. Now it all made sense, and that filled her with rage. Anger at not being told, anger at growing up alone, anger at having looked into that man's face for days, without knowing he was her blood. The next day, she didn't go to work or to class. She walked through the city with the photo in her pocket, thought about confronting him, about never coming back, about disappearing. But by late afternoon, she sat on a bench by the lake and cried quietly. She felt orphaned all over again, only, this time, orphaned by two stories, the mother who died in silence, and the father who showed up far too late. Rowan didn't sleep either. He spent the day locked inside the boardroom, silent, waiting, dreading. He knew she'd received the envelope, but had no idea how she would respond. He feared he'd broken her, that he'd pushed her away for good. For the first time in years, he canceled everything, cleared his calendar, because for the first time, something mattered more than business. She did. 2 days later, she showed up. She stopped in his doorway, eyes red, her face calm but firm. Is it true? Rowan stood slowly. It is. Silence. Why? He took a deep breath. Because I was a coward. Because I let your mother walk away. Because I didn't look for you. Because I didn't know how. But I'm here now. And I don't want to run anymore. She didn't answer. She just left. But she didn't quit. The company. She kept coming. Kept working. Quiet. But something had changed. Rowan respected her pace. Never pushed. Just waited. One day, he left a note in her locker. I'm sorry. Whenever you're ready. I'm here. Weeks passed like that. Slowly, Elowen began to see him not as the CEO, but as a man. He seemed different, quieter, more present, more human, and that unraveled her. Because as much as she was still angry, there was something inside her that recognized him, something that secretly wanted to belong. Little by little, they talked. At first, about small things, then about her mother, then about everything they were and weren't. Rowan shared old letters, spoke hard truths, asked for forgiveness, told her how he felt, and cried in front of her for the first time. Elowen listened. She cried too. Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about seeing, and she was ready to see it all. That's how the rebuilding began. Slow, real. Imperfect, but filled with love. Their relationship was still fragile, like wet glass. One wrong move could make everything slip, but there was progress. Rowan invited her to quiet lunches in the company cafeteria. She accepted, cautiously. They talked about light things. Then about Celeste. He showed her pictures. She shared memories, and slowly, his presence stopped making her sick, and started stirring something more confusing, a longing for what they never had. During one of those talks, Rowan mentioned an old property he and Celeste used to visit when they were young. She used to say that place felt like a refuge outside of time, he said, eyes far away. Elowen paused, surprised. My mom took me there when I was little, she said. There was a lavender garden, right? Rowan froze. The garden, the lavender, the scent of a lost youth. Celeste had, somehow, kept that connection alive. It wasn't just the past, it was an invisible thread tying them together. Days later, Elowen found an old box of her mother's, tucked away in a cabinet she almost never opened. Inside was a yellowed folder with documents, childhood drawings, and at the bottom, a letter. It was addressed to R.D., but it had never been sent. The envelope was sealed. With trembling hands, Elowen opened it and read. Every line hit like lightning. *** Rowan. If you're reading this, it means. Elowen found the truth. I wanted to tell you so many times. But I was scared. Scared you'd reject her. Scared of your parents. Scared of everything. All I ask is that, if she ever finds her way to you, look at her with the same eyes you once looked at me, because she's half of me, but she's entirely yours. Elowen cried like she hadn't cried since her mother's funeral. But the letter didn't end there. There was a postscript, a secret, something that changed everything. P.S. They tried to keep me away from you. It wasn't just fear. Your mother offered me money to disappear, said she'd destroy my life if I told the truth. And I believed her. That's why I vanished. When Rowan heard those words from his daughter's mouth, he went pale. Sat down, breathed in deeply, and for a long time, said nothing. Then, like a man on the edge of collapse, he whispered, She destroyed everything, and I let her, because now he knew, his mother, the woman who shaped his empire, had also shaped his ruin. She had separated two lives, erased an entire future with a single threat. It was the first time Elowen saw him truly broken. No armor, no control. And strangely, that's when she began to forgive him, for real. Because sometimes, the most brutal twist isn't discovering who lied to you. It's realizing that someone else's pain is also your own. That night, they returned to the lavender garden. They said nothing. They just sat there, and in that silence, for the first time, they felt like they were exactly where they were meant to be. The reunion in the lavender garden had been the beginning of something, but it also opened a wound to simply heal with time. Rowan and Elowen were growing closer, but there was a crack between them that couldn't be ignored. And that crack had a name: absence. A few days later, Elowen asked to meet, not at the office, not at home, but at the same bench where he had once offered her coffee weeks before. The wind was cold. She wore a faded blue coat and held the photo in her hands, the one of Celeste and Rowan as young lovers. She sat in silence. When he arrived, he sat beside her, just like before. But this time, there was no shyness. There was fire in her eyes. You left me alone, she said, staring at him. Rowan took a deep breath. I know. You didn't look for me. Didn't write. Didn't ask. You just moved on. I did, he replied, his voice heavy. Because I was weak, a coward, too young and too shaped by everyone else, and that excuses you. No, but it's the truth. Elowen clenched. Her fists, the tears came before the anger. I grew up thinking I was abandoned by someone who maybe didn't even know I existed, and now you show up, and I don't know what to do with all of this. Rowan looked at her. His eyes were wet too. Do whatever you need to with me. Elowen, hate me, reject me, cut me off. But don't think, not for a second, that I wouldn't give everything to go back, everything, because ever since I saw you, all I want is to know you. The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable, but necessary. Elowen looked up at the sky, took a deep breath. I don't know how to love you yet. Rowan swallowed hard. And I don't know how to be a father. She looked him in the eye. But maybe we can try, he nodded, eyes brimming. Trying means everything to me. That conversation didn't heal the pain, but it untangled the knots. It didn't erase the past, but it opened a path to a different future. It was the most honest conversation either of them had ever had. No defenses, no titles, just a people, bound by blood. That had never been enough, but now, maybe, could be a starting point. From that day on, Rowan stopped being the CEO who watched from a distance and became a man who showed up. He called to ask about her day, brought books on nursing, learned to listen, and Elowen slowly stopped seeing him as a symbol of abandonment and began to see, behind the fear, a father in the making. The days after that moment were quiet but meaningful. Elowen didn't change overnight. She still guarded herself, still tested trust. But something inside her had shifted. Now, she knew who she was, where she came from, and that she was no longer alone in the world. It didn't erase her old wounds, but it gave her life a new direction. Rowan changed too. He showed up less on magazine covers and more at Elowen school events. He asked about her studies, what she wanted to do, which classes she liked, when she said she dreamed of working in public hospitals to help those without access to care. He listened with pride, not as a CEO, but as her father. For the first time, his success wasn't measured in shares or profits, but in the light in her eyes. The transformation was subtle, but steady. Elowen began caring for herself more. She swapped her cleaning uniform for clothes she chose, invested in herself without guilt. Rowan, in turn, donated part of his personal wealth to a project in Celeste's name, in honor of the woman he never forgot and the daughter he almost lost. He created a scholarship for girls like Elowen. It wasn't redemption, but it was a step. They learned to laugh together, to share stories, to remember Celeste without letting grief consume it all. Elowen showed him her plants. Rowan learned to water them. She taught him to make strong coffee. He took her to the art gallery Celeste had once loved. Bit by bit, father and daughter weren't rebuilding a past, they were building a present, and a future that finally felt possible. There were setbacks, moments when Elowen pulled away, when she missed her mother too much, when the old loneliness crept back in. But Rowan learned not to push. He waited, and when she came back, his arms were open. It was new, strange, beautiful. It was love being learned in real time. More than forgiving each other, they saw each other. Elowen began to realize that behind the suit and the reputation, that man carried his own losses. He'd been scared to, he had failed to, and Rowan, finally, saw past the daughter he'd never known, and recognized the strong, whole woman she had become on her own. Transformation isn't just changing who you are, it's accepting who you've been, and that's what they did. They rebuilt the bond, with time, with life, and with Celeste's memory, not to replace the pain, but to use it as a foundation. Now, father and daughter were finally on the same side of the story, and that was everything they needed. Time passed, but it moved differently now. Elowen no longer lived on the margins of her own story. She passed her nursing program with honors, and was offered a hospital internship in the city. She still lived in the same apartment, surrounded by her plants and motivational post-its, but now the name on the door ready, Devereux. For the first time, she allowed herself to belong. Rowan watched from a respectful distance, heartful, ego finally in the right place. He didn't need to prove anything to the world anymore, just to her. One Saturday morning, he surprised Elowen with a small box. Inside, a necklace with a lavender pendant. For you to remember, he said, his voice trembling, that even in silence. Someone was loving you the whole time, she smiled, and for the first time, she hugged him without hesitation. But life still had one final gesture to offer. While sorting through her mother's old books, Elowen found a folder she'd never opened. Inside, a contract for the country house, the Lavender Place. The signature, Rowan Devereux, the date. 2 months before Celeste passed away. Without her knowing, he had bought the property and registered it in Celeste's name, with a quiet clause to be transferred to Elowen when she turned 21. She broke down in tears. Rowan had been there, all along. From afar, silently, he had tried to protect them, and now she had something she never imagined, a real home, a place to begin again, a living memory of her mother, and a future shared with her father. On move-in day, they went there together. They planted new lavender, they laughed, they cried. And as the sun sank behind the horizon, Elowen looked at him and said, "You missed so much, but there's still time to live the rest with me." Rowan smiled, "And I will, one day at a time." The story wasn't perfect, but it was real, full of flaws, full of rediscovery, full of loss, and full of gain. And if pain was what brought them together, then forgiveness was what made them stay. Have you ever had a reunion like this, unexpected and life-changing? Tell us in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories like this one.